welcome to my channel where I talk to successful IB graduates about their experience of the IB diploma. Today, not only have I got a special guest for you who achieved extraordinary success in his IB exams, but I also have a special set of questions. The questions that I'm going to ask today were written by a lovely subscriber who is a pre-IB student, and they asked if I could interview someone who got a 7 in higher level maths to talk about their experiences. Today I'm talking with Aris Grivas, who is here to talk about his experiences of higher level IB maths. Ari, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Ari, what was your daily study routine that helped you with your success in higher level maths?
So the key to success with higher level IB maths is for you to be regular with your study, in the sense that you have to have a daily routine. A routine doesn't actually mean that you have to do something specific every day. But let's say you have a free period during school. You try and fill up this free period with you trying to solve the questions you've been assigned in the previous class, and also just try and go on and solve the past paper questions for the topic. Past paper questions are the key, and that is the routine.
How challenging is it to perform well in higher level maths while simultaneously making time for CAS, extended essay, social life, and the rest of the IB subjects?
So, in order for you to balance your life while being successful at higher level IB maths, have your CAS activity be your extracurricular activity you would usually have, or have your extended essay be, for example, something of a hobby of yours. And you just make your schedule and your balance something of a natural course, rather than you trying to plan everything and nothing happens in the end. The key is to limit your extracurricular activities in the sense that you make them your CAS.
Do you want to talk about what you mean by that?
Sure. Let me firstly give you an example of what I did. So in CAS you have your long-term activity and you have your various other short-term activities. So my long-term activity was scouting, as I was a scout, and that was essentially what I did as my extracurricular activity in any case. And then the other short-term activities, for example, were other things that I would do in any case. So CAS doesn't become something where you clock hours. It becomes a natural way of you trying to explain to IB what you do in your real life. And that then increases the hours available for you to have to study for other subjects as well, other than maths. Obviously maths will be the meat of what you do every day, but your other subjects can have lots of time available with that scheme. The scheme of you having CAS being the real-life extracurricular activities.
And what do you wish you had known before starting higher level maths?
So, what do I wish? I wish I would have had the same scheme I had in my last year. I would have it in my first year, and I would especially have it in my first term of my first year, where I did not really concentrate on the aspect of past papers. Although you don't have enough material to work on, you can still work on the material you've been taught, or you can even prepare in the summer before with some pre-sessions of some basic stuff in maths, and then you can then go onto the first term and focus on the questions, focus on the material you've learned already in the summer. So it's always trying to have that transition into the IB as smooth as possible, and the transition into year 13, the last year before you sit for the exam, as smooth as possible. Always study, but not too much.
So what you're recommending is incremental and regular and consistent study, rather than nothing and cramming and nothing and cramming.
Exactly. So I will give you another example. A friend of mine studied for material related to IB higher level maths before the start of the first year of the diploma, and he was already at a very acceptable level for him to start past paper questions and a proper preparation for the exam 2 years before the exam. And that was happening at the first term of the first year. I mean, this shows some sort of incremental process you can start upon, and then you can continue that into the first year and into the summer between the first year and the second year, and it goes on and on and on. It doesn't mean you have to study a lot before the exam. It means that you don't study that much before the exam, in some cases at all, because you want to rest your brain. And well before the exam, you have studied enough to be prepared.
And what tips do you have for someone who is aiming for a 7 in higher level maths?
Focus on the subjects, the sections of the curriculum that you are least good at, and do that on a regular basis as you do your studies. And also try to not stress out when you're not doing well in those sections, and that will usually happen when you try and sit for tests under exam conditions for those topics. You won't be able to complete those exercises you're asked to complete in the time allocated, and you have to just practice, and you'll have to make specific processes during these answers to the questions, so that you literally don't have to think to answer these questions. And from that point onwards, you can then concentrate on the tricky parts of the questions, because usually a long question in the papers has multiple parts. You have to standardize those parts, and that's the main tip I have. You have to standardize the easy parts, so you have those marks guaranteed, and then you have more time to spend for those parts which are very original. That's the point of IB higher level maths, that it has some original parts, and that's what differentiates it from other maths for high school level students. Focus on what you're least good at, on what you can perfect, and do not stress out.
The next question is an interesting question, because many people assume that if you got a 7 in higher level maths, it must have been easy. You're so good at maths. There's people who are good at maths and people who aren't good at maths, and it's interesting for people to hear about moments which were tough in that journey to that goal and to that achievement of getting a 7 in higher level maths. What tasks or moments did you experience that were relatively tougher, do you feel, for you?
So one of the most, shocking moments as I entered IB high level maths was my test result for my midterms, for the end of my first term during my first year, where I got a 5. And that actually, instead of forcing me to maybe think of standard level maths, it made me want to work a lot harder than I was working for that specific subject. As I looked at my results, this was my weakness. This was a weak subject for me at the time, so I switched my focus onto maths for the next term, and then I actually achieved a 7 in the end of year exams for that first year, and that was, I think, something of a turnaround. Now, in terms of a difficult subject, I can say the option I took, which was stats, was tricky in the sense that I had little preparation. It was a case of me trying to learn it by myself instead of learning it with a class, because I had chosen a different option to my class. And that was a difficult moment during the summer between first and second year, trying to learn a whole subject from ground up, and that was a challenge for me to take that risk and try and do well in a subject, in that option by myself, without the help, without the guidance of my teacher. So I can say I was pleased for my results. So again, that was a turnaround from what my initial results were, attempting the past paper questions which were disappointing, I can say.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to current IB students or pre-IB students before we wrap up?
Maths is maths. Maths is always straightforward. Take it easy. You'll do well.